Except, you know, people didn't want a cop then. They didn't want somebody who participated in the mass incarceration of black people, using of police force on protesters. They were disgusted by it. Meaningless. This is just the same exact speech that Joe Biden has been given since 2020. Like, you know, it was the speech that he was giving as his approval ratings declined faster and faster and faster. You spent 2 years when the Democrats controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House telling me the Democrats couldn't do anything because of the parliamentarian and Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. What grand powers of America will definitely strike China first. Yeah, I that is without a doubt.
Mike. I don't know who you are. I don't know where you are. But you may want to start changing your ways. Change.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
By the way, the people on the floor are not poor either.
Good evening. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all. Okay, we got to get to some business. Okay, thank you all. Okay. Thank you. Please, thank you so very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Okay, let's get to business. All right. So, let me start by thanking my most incredible husband, Doug, for being an incredible partner to me, an incredible father to Cole and Ella, and happy anniversary, Dougie. I love you so very much. To our President, Joe Biden. When I think about the path that we have traveled together, Joe, I am filled with gratitude. Your record is extraordinary, as history will show, and your character is inspiring. And Doug and I love you and Jill and are forever thankful to you both.
It's like, she's like, you rescued me from having the most incompetent campaign in the history of presidential politics. I remember in 2019, 538, their first prediction of the, you know, they did like a power rankings of the Democratic, primary, and they had Kamala Harris at number 1. She was a very early front runner in the race. And she fucking face planted and didn't even make it to Iowa. So yeah, of course she's thankful to Joe Biden from rescuing her from basically being humiliated and irrelevant. So yeah, you know, duh.
And to Coach Tim Walz, you are going to be an incredible vice president. And to the delegates and everyone who has put your faith in our campaign, your support is humbling. So, America, the path that led me here in recent weeks was no doubt unexpected. But I'm no stranger to unlikely journeys. So, my mother, our mother, Kamala Harris, had one of her own. And I miss her every day, and especially right now. And I know she's looking down smiling. I know that. So my mother,
And the other thing is like her sister that they've put on a lot of videos in this DNC. I think I've seen her sister more than like anyone else in this fucking convention. Very personal cult vibes. Is a huge neoliberal and is a huge piece of shit. Like, so like, you know, the idea of Kamala Harris as, you know, left. As I saw more and more of Maya, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about her and how right-wing she is.
was 19 when she crossed the world alone, traveling from India to California.
Send her back. Send her back. Am I right? That's what you think about immigrants, right? It's incredible to be the daughter of two immigrants and then come out with Nazi immigration policy. It's fucking disgusting. I don't understand how people do this type of shit. It really is disgusting.
With an unshakable dream to be the scientist who would cure breast cancer. When she finished school, she was supposed to return home to a traditional arranged marriage. But as fate would have it, she met my father, Donald Harris, a student from Jamaica. They fell in love and got married, and that act of self-determination made my sister Maya and me. Growing up, we moved a lot. I will always remember that big Mayflower truck packed with all our belongings, ready to go to Illinois, to Wisconsin, and wherever our parents' jobs took us. My early memories of our parents together are very joyful ones. A home filled with laughter and music, Aretha, Coltrane, and Miles. At the park, my mother would say, "Stay close." But my father would say, as he smiled, "Run, Kamala, run. Don't be afraid. Don't let anything stop you." From my earliest years, he taught me to be fearless. But the harmony between my parents did not last. When I was in elementary school, they split up. And it was mostly my mother who raised us. Before she could finally afford to buy a home, she rented a small apartment in the East Bay. In the Bay, you either live in the hills or the flatlands. We lived in the flats. A beautiful working class neighborhood.
My guess is that neighborhood isn't working class anymore, huh? My guess is that neighborhood is, you know, tech bros.
Of firefighters, nurses, and construction workers. All who tended their lawns with pride. My mother, she worked long hours. And like many working parents, she leaned on a trusted circle to help raise us. Mrs. Shelton, who ran the daycare below us and became a second mother. Uncle Sherman.
It's like what
Aunt
I say
Mary,
is not even penetrating
Uncle
some
Freddie,
people's brains.
Auntie Chris. None of them family by blood, and all of them family by love. Family who taught us how to make gumbo, how to play chess, and sometimes even let us win. Family who loved us, believed in us, and told us we could be anything and do anything. They instilled in us the values they personified: community, faith, and the importance of treating others as you would want to be treated, with kindness, respect, and compassion. My mother was a brilliant, 5-foot-tall, brown woman with an accent. And as the eldest child, I saw how the world would sometimes treat her. But my mother never lost her cool. She was tough, courageous, a trailblazer in the fight for women's health, and she taught Maya and me a lesson that Michelle mentioned the other night. She taught us to never complain about injustice, but do something about it.
Join in. Join in. Do the justice to the next generation. You've got yours. Fuck them.
Something about it. That was my mother. And she taught us, and she also taught us, and never do anything half-assed. And that is a direct quote.
Like your first presidential campaign?
A direct quote. I grew up immersed in the ideals of the civil rights movement. My parents had met at a civil rights gathering, and they made sure that we learned about civil rights leaders, including the lawyers like Thurgood Marshall and Constance Baker Motley.
Yeah, they would have loved doing a genocide in Gaza.
Those who battled in the courtroom to make real the promise of America. So at a young age, I decided I wanted to do that work. I wanted to be a lawyer. And when it came time to choose the type of law I would pursue, I reflected on a pivotal moment in my life. You see, when I was in high school, I started to notice something about my best friend, Wanda. She was sad at school, and there were times she didn't want to go home. So one day I asked if everything was all right, and she confided in me that she was being sexually abused by her stepfather. And I immediately told her she had to come stay with us, and she did. This is one of the reasons I became a prosecutor, to protect people like Wanda, because I believe everyone has a right to safety, to dignity, and to justice. As a prosecutor, when I had a case, I charged it not in the name of the victim, but in the name of the people. For a simple reason. In our system of justice, a harm against any one of us is a...
So basically, this is exactly what she tried to run in 2020. The "For the People" was her slogan. This is what she was trying to go, but except, you know, people didn't want a cop then. They didn't want somebody who participated in the mass incarceration of black people, using of police force on protesters. They were disgusted by it, disgusted by America's racist criminal justice system and how it clearly didn't have the legitimacy of the people, and that it served the interests of the rich, it served the interest of connected elites, served the interest of white people, especially rich white people.
Harm against all of us. And I would often explain this to console survivors of crime, to remind them no one should be made to fight alone. We are all in this together. And every day in the courtroom, I stood proudly before a judge and I said 5 words: Kamala Harris for the people. And to be clear, my entire career, I've only had one client, the people. And so, on behalf of the people, on behalf of every American, regardless of party, race, gender, or the language your grandmother speaks, on behalf of my mother and everyone who has ever set out on their own unlikely journey, On behalf of Americans like the people I grew up with, people who work hard, chase their dreams, and look out for one another. On behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America. And with this election, our nation with this election has a precious, fleeting opportunity to move past the bitterness, cynicism, and divisive battles of the past, a chance to chart a new way forward. Not as members of any one party or faction, but as Americans. And let me say, I know there are people of various political views watching tonight, and I want you to know, I promise to be a president for all Americans. You can always trust me to put country above party and self, to hold sacred America's fundamental principles, from the rule of law to free and fair elections to the peaceful transfer of power. I will be a president who unites us around our highest aspirations, a president who leads and listens, who is realistic, practical, and has common sense.
Meaningless. 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 Piffle. I mean, listen, it's going to happen in any speech, right? You have to have some rhetoric, but it's just, at this point, I think it's better to just edit this kind of shit out, because every politician says it to the point where it becomes just a waste of time.
Always fights.
Reports said Nancy looked less than pleased with the speech. Okay. Do you have a link? Do you have evidence? Are you just typing shit?
For the American people. From the courthouse to the White House, that has been my life's work. As a young courtroom prosecutor in Oakland, California, I stood up for women and children against predators who abuse them. As Attorney General of California, I took on the big banks, delivered $20 billion for middle-class families who faced foreclosure, and helped pass a homeowner bill of rights, one of the first of its kind in the nation. I stood up for veterans and students being scammed by big for-profit colleges, for workers who are being cheated out of their wages, the wages they were due, for seniors facing elder abuse. I fought against the cartels who traffic in guns and drugs and human beings, who threaten the security of our border and the safety of our communities. And I will tell you, these fights were not easy, and neither were the elections that put me in those offices. We were underestimated at practically every turn, but we never gave up, because the future is always worth fighting for. A fight for America's future. Fellow Americans, this election is not only the most important of our lives, it is one of the most important in the life of our nation. In many ways, Donald Trump is an unserious man. But the consequences of putting Donald Trump back in the White House are extremely serious. Consider not only the chaos and calamity when he was in office, but also the gravity of what has happened since he lost the last election. Donald Trump tried to throw away your votes. When he failed, he sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol, where they assaulted law enforcement officers. When politicians in his own party begged him to call off the mob and send help, he did the opposite. He fanned the flames. And now, for an entirely different set of crimes.
I mean, like, legitimately, like, my reaction as I listen to this speech is this is just the same exact speech that Joe Biden has been given since 2020. Like, you know, it was the speech that he was giving as his approval ratings declined faster and faster and faster. It's like, what's even the point of giving this speech? It would have been better to walk up there and be like, I accept, and then walk off the stage. Like, what is this shit? It's a boring, worthless speech. Can't hold my attention because it's just so much filler. I've watched a lot of nomination speeches. This may be one of the worst I've ever seen. Actually worst. Like, in its ability to hold attention, its rhetorical skill. Like, I would put it under Sarah Palin's acceptance speech in 2008. Not because I agree with the policies of Sarah Palin or anything, but just in the skill of the delivery. Like, it's not only poorly delivered, it's boring and meaningless pablum.
He was found guilty of fraud by a jury of everyday Americans and separately found liable for committing sexual abuse.
And like, by the way, the DNC crowd has been poorly disciplined, to say the least. Like, no one can deliver a speech because they just start applauding over every fucking sentence, and it just sounds bad. They make listening to these speeches tiresome because they won't shut the fuck up.
Consider what he intends to do if we give him power again. Consider his explicit intent to set free
Mike, do I have a loose cord in my mic?
extremists who assaulted those law enforcement officers at the Capitol. His explicit intent to jail journalists, political opponents, and anyone he sees as the enemy. His explicit intent to deploy our active duty military against our own citizens. Consider
Listen,
the power.
He wanted to use active duty military, but Tim Walz used the National Guard, which is significantly different. Like, what are you even talking about? Like, okay. That's why he picked up the phone and praised Tim Walz for sending in the National Guard, which is a clip that we played. Like, who gives a fuck? Shut the fuck up. The posse comitatus libertarians are some of the most annoying people on the fucking planet. It's not real. Shut up. Militaries will be used against their own people if you actually threaten the status quo. Deal with it. They're not going to stand aside. If you're not prepared for that, then you're not ready. You're immature. But this is like some sort of like, oh, the military is going to be used against civilians, sort of like the National Guard was used against civilians, which is the military. It's a waste of our fucking lives to listen to this bullshit.
He will have especially after the United States Supreme Court just ruled that he would be immune from criminal prosecution.
Are you doing anything about the Supreme Court? Like, if that's so bad, are you doing anything about the Supreme Court? And that's why I think Supreme Court justices should have term limits. You don't even say anything. Okay, if the Supreme Court is doing something so fucking dangerous, why don't you have a response? Or is this all just kabuki theater bullshit? This is why the speech sucks. The speech sucks because she says things are bad and then doesn't have a solution for the bad thing. She just is drawing attention to it and then saying, well, I guess I'm powerless.
Just imagine Donald Trump with no guardrails and how he would use the immense powers of the presidency of the United States.
Immense powers? You guys have been spending 4 years telling me the president can't do anything. You spent 2 years when the Democrats controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House telling me the Democrats couldn't do anything because of the parliamentarian and Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. What grand powers? I thought you guys were powerless. You can't stop Israel from doing the war. You can't pass any policies. You can't do anything. What do you mean, the powers? What powers? You've spent 4 years powerless to the world around you.
Not to improve your life, not to strengthen our national security, but to serve the only client he's ever had, himself. And we know what a second Trump term would look like. It's all laid out in Project 2025, written by his closest advisors, and its sum total is to pull our country back to the past. But America, we are not going back. We are not going back. We are not going back.
Right.
We are not going back to when Donald Trump tried to cut Social Security and Medicare. We are not going back to when he tried to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, when insurance companies could deny people with pre-existing conditions. We are not going to let him eliminate the Department of Education that funds our public schools. We are not going to let him end programs like Head Start that provide preschool and child care for our children. America, we are not going back. And we are charting a new way forward. Forward to a future.
And twirling, always twirling.
With a strong and growing middle class, because we know a strong middle class has always...
What's middle class mean? What's middle class mean? I have absolutely no idea what that means. What does middle class mean?
Has been critical to America's success, and building that middle class will be a defining goal of my presidency.
Meaningless.
And I'll tell you, this is personal for me. The middle class is where I come from. My mother kept a strict budget. We lived within our means, yet we wanted for little. And she expected us to make the most of the opportunities that were available to us and to be grateful for them. Because, as she taught us, opportunity is not available to everyone. That's why we will create what I call an opportunity economy where everyone has the chance to compete and a chance to succeed. Whether you live in a rural area, small town, or big city. And as president, I will bring together labor and workers and small business owners and entrepreneurs and American companies to create jobs, to grow our economy, and to lower the cost of everyday.
What are you gonna be? What are you, a headhunter? Are you like, what are you talking about? What does that mean? Does it mean anything? Again, a left-winger would say, I will help American workers get their fair share of the profits that these corporations are creating, and instead of sending them to overseas shareholders, we're going to keep those profits here at home, and everyone's going to earn a living wage. Everybody who works a full-time job should have a secure living in this country. That's what a left-wing person would say. What she's saying is actually what Republicans say. This is actually Republican framing. This is right-wing framing of the economy, which is, it is the government's job to smooth over the conflicts so that the workers get back to work. You know, like, this is such a bad speech. Ideologically, you know, we talked a lot about this before with Tim Walz. We talked about how saying the difference between someone who says worker and somebody who says middle class, the difference between somebody who talks about corporate profits or unions as a right, or, you know, a person who claps along with the crowd versus a person who lets themselves, who basks in the applause. Like, these are all like subtle little things, and every subtle thing that Kamala is doing in this speech is right wing.
Needs like
how do you genuine question, how do you keep home in the face of deep entrenchment of the status quo? Keep home, keep hope, you mean? Because these people are they're not deeply entrenched. They're very shallowly entrenched. They're as deeply entrenched as an overstuffed tick ballooning with our blood. You can pick them off with tweezers. You just have to know they're there. Like AOC, a 28-year-old bartender, decided she was going to challenge a member of Democratic establishment in the Queens, New York, the Queens machine. And she knocked a little bit of doors and sent a couple flyers out, and she fucking beat his ass. These people are not deeply entrenched. The only time they actually do well is when they can see it. They can see the threat coming out from a long mile away, and they can focus all their defensive efforts on one seat. The biggest problem we have is there isn't a big enough movement. If like 150 Democrats got legitimately challenged by strong candidates from the left, AIPAC wouldn't have enough money and wherewithal to defend them all. But the reality is we don't have a strong enough movement that could even do that. And with the way that super PACs work, and with the way that money works in politics, there's so much wealth and power concentrated at the top that they can deploy it very efficiently and very quickly and very effectively. Whereas, you know, we're hoping people go viral on Twitter or something.
Care and housing and groceries. We will provide access to capital for small business owners and entrepreneurs and founders. And we will end America's housing shortage and protect Social Security and Medicare. Now compare that to Donald Trump, because I think everyone here knows he doesn't actually fight for the middle class. He doesn't actually fight for the middle class. Instead, he fights for himself and his billionaire friends. And he will give them another round of tax breaks that will add up to $5 trillion to the national debt. And all the while, he intends to enact what in effect is a national sales tax, call it a Trump tax, that would raise prices on middle-class families by almost $4,000 a year. Well, instead of a Trump tax hike, we will pass a middle-class tax cut that will benefit more than 100 million Americans. Friends, I believe America...
Wow, guys, a tax cut. So left.
...cannot truly be prosperous unless Americans are fully able to make their own decisions about their own lives, especially on matters of heart and home. But tonight, in America, too many women are not able to make those decisions. And let's be clear about how we got here. Donald Trump handpicked members of the United States Supreme Court to take away reproductive freedom. And now he brags about it. In his words, quote, "I did it and I'm proud to have done it," end quote. Well, I'll tell you, over the past 2 years, I've traveled across our country, and women have told me their stories. Husbands and fathers have shared theirs. Stories of women miscarrying in a parking lot, developing sepsis, losing the ability to ever again have children, all because doctors are afraid they may go to jail for caring for their patients. Couples just trying to grow their family, cut off in the middle of IVF treatments. Children who have survived sexual assault, potentially being forced to carry a pregnancy to term. This is what's happening in our country because of Donald Trump. And understand, he is not done. As a part of his agenda, he and his allies would limit access to birth control, ban medication abortion, and enact a nationwide abortion ban with or without Congress. And get this, he plans to create a national anti-abortion coordinator and force states to report on women's miscarriages and abortions. Simply put, they are out of their minds. And one must ask, why exactly is it that they don't trust women? Well, we trust women. We trust women. And when Congress passes a bill to restore reproductive freedom, as President of the United States, I will proudly sign it into law.
I guess, how's that magic gonna happen? There's a filibuster. The best case scenario, the Democrats get 50 senators.
In this election, many other fundamental freedoms are at stake. The freedom to live safe from gun violence in our schools, communities, and places of worship. The freedom to love who you love openly and with pride. The freedom to breathe clean air and drink clean water and live free from the pollution that fuels the climate crisis.
The climate
and the
crisis.
Freedom that unlocks all the others, the freedom to vote. With this election, we finally have the opportunity to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act.
Oh yeah, the United States of America will definitely strike China first. Yeah, I that is without a doubt. There's without a doubt. It'll get to the point where China's military forces are large enough that they can challenge the United States. But because China is relatively contained, it doesn't have a lot of like foreign military bases. It keeps a lot of its Navy very close in its own ports, sort of like the US Navy was in Pearl Harbor. So I do expect the United States to do some sort of like Pearl Harbor act, probably during a war with Iran. Or is this something so insane and out of pocket that doesn't make sense? Because that's what fascist governments do. Fascist governments just start more and more and more wars, and they put themselves against the entire planet. That's just what they do. They can't help themselves. Like, you know, they can't stop China because China has like 90 times the shipbuilding capacity. So, you know, give China another couple decades and they start putting out, you know, aircraft carriers and submarines at the same scale of the United States, and they're just not going to be able to compete.
Let me be clear, and let me be clear. After decades in law enforcement, I know the importance of safety and security, especially at our border. Last year, Joe and I
insanity, like, you guys probably don't watch the same type of things that I watch, which is totally normal, because why would you? You know, I look into what military journals are saying. There's been this weird increase of like social media propaganda from the military as well, I've seen lately. But basically they talk about near peer. They call it a near peer adversary. I read something recently from I think it was like, you know, the command master sergeant of the army or something, where he was talking about how America doesn't really have any veterans. And what he meant by that is we've been fighting coin wars, you know, counterinsurgency wars, low level, low intensity conflicts. We don't know what it's like to be in a war where the enemy can hit you with artillery, where the enemy has tanks pointing at you, the enemy has missiles and bombs, where, you know, we're used to fighting a war where we're behind 3 screens, or we're behind, you know, reactive armor, and they're peasants walking around with fucking AKs, and we call in airstrikes whenever we feel threatened. There are no Americans that actually know how to fight a war against an adversary that is almost as strong as we are. Now, why would he be going out and saying that shit? Because they're talking about war with China, and that's what the military is focused on. The whole military, there hasn't been an American buy-in to this idea, but the military industrial complex is trying to reconfigure itself for a war against China. Why do you think they're bringing back industrial capacity to the US, chat? Do you think it's suddenly they decided they wanted to pay American workers again? It's because they know they'll lose a war with China. And they thought for the longest time that the capitalists in China would do what they did in Russia, which is sell out their country for their own profit. But Xi is a communist, and he's keeping the capitalists in line. He's keeping the Communist Party of China in the predominant political place of the China, and they're realizing that their strategy of like liberalization failed. China has created a different way of developing a country, and now it's just becoming so strong as a nation that it's beginning to challenge America's preeminence, both militarily and economically. So the United States is trying to throw the brakes on the Chinese ability to grow capacity in both economically and militarily, because it wants to remain its relative position of strength over China. That's what's happening. They miscalculated. So now they're panicking, and they're trying to bring their production back to the US or allied countries. And so they're supporting fascism in India because they want to have the United States align with India. And they're like, okay, you can genocide Muslims. And so they're telling the far right fascists in India they can genocide Muslims as long as they support the United States and Israel's genocide of Palestinians. And that's why you see a lot of Indian nationalists defending Israel online. So there's a fascist axis of Israel, the United States, and Hindutva fascists in India, which is going to be in opposition to, you know, Brazil, China, South Africa, rising non-Western powers. So like that's kind of the United States is trying to lead the fascist axis of the 21st century. That's kind of basically what's happening.
Brought together Democrats and conservative Republicans to write the strongest border bill in decades. The Border Patrol endorsed it. But Donald Trump believes a border deal would hurt his campaign. So he ordered his allies in Congress to kill the deal. Well, I refuse to play politics with our security. And here is my pledge to you.
Might have to watch some
As
Richard
president,
Wolff.
I will bring back the bipartisan border security bill that he killed, and I will sign it into law. I know we can live up to our proud heritage as a nation of immigrants and reform our broken immigration system. We can create an earned pathway to citizenship and secure our border.
That's not what the bipartisan bill does, by the way, but okay.
And America, we must also be steadfast in advancing our security and values abroad. As Vice President, I have confronted threats to our security.
We're also supporting a fascist government in Pakistan. I forgot to mention that.
I will ensure America always has the strongest, most lethal fighting force in the world. And I will fulfill our sacred obligation to care for our troops and their families, and I will always honor and never disparage their service and their sacrifice.
What if their service is disparageable? What if they commit crimes? What if they're raping people? What if they're murdering innocents? Not all troops are good. What makes you good is your actions, not who you are. That's fascism.
I will make sure that we lead the world into the future on space and artificial intelligence, that America, not China, wins the competition for the 21st century, and that we strengthen, not abdicate, our global leadership. Trump, on the other hand...
That's another way of saying she hopes to maintain capitalist hegemony and undermine a polarity, a world of international law where every nation is treated as equal, where human beings have inalienable rights, but rather domination of some nations by others. This is without a doubt a beyond right-wing speech.
Threatened to abandon NATO. He encouraged Putin to invade our allies, said Russia could, quote, do whatever the hell they want. 5 days before Russia attacked...
This is not a speech George W. Bush would have given in 2004. In 2004, they were still optimistic about the liberalization of China. This is more conservative than a speech than George W. Bush would have given.
Ukraine.
George W. Bush ran on compassionate conservatism and was more pro-immigration. And he was also more pro-China.
With President Zelensky to warn him about Russia's plan to invade.
I'm from an Indian public university. I can't even mention Palestine here on campus. Last year I had to bail out undergrads because the state police booked them for handwritten Free Palestine posters. The U.S. interference is nauseating. I mean, it's not just U.S. interference. It's your own fascist Hindutva movement that wants to commit genocide against Muslims in India. So that's like the long-term goal is to destroy Muslims in India.
I helped mobilize a global response over 50 countries to defend against Putin's aggression. And as president, I will stand strong with Ukraine and our NATO allies. With respect to the war in Gaza, President Biden and I are working around the clock because now is the time to get a hostage deal and a ceasefire deal done. And let me be clear.
This is actually where it becomes fascist, because just lying blatantly about easily disprovable facts and commanding that your supporters believe it and silencing any that dissent, even when they dissent from good faith and with honesty, attacking purveyors of truth like journalists and international organizations and humanitarian organizations for the service of the murder of children. Terrible.
I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself, and I will always ensure Israel has the ability to defend itself, because the people of Israel must never again face the horror that a terrorist organization called Hamas caused on October 7, including...
But what about what the Palestinian people have faced? The horrors of the occupation in the West Bank, the illegal annexations that even Barack Obama was opposed to. Like, what are you... Okay. Like, so if a people without a government, without a military are attacked and they have no protectors, if they take up arms, what are they supposed to do? Stand in a field so they can be murdered? Like, what is this?
Unspeakable sexual violence and the massacre of young...
What sexual violence? The sexual violence that's happening is in the Israeli rape prisons, where 65% of Israelis support the rape of detainees that haven't even been established to be terrorists. And even if they were, rape would be torture and against international law and would be morally depraved fascism.
People at a music festival. At the same time,
how would we feel? Just as a hypothetical, imagine you're in Germany, it's the Holocaust, and outside Dachau, a bunch of Germans gather for a music festival and beer tents, and they have, you know, they do an Oktoberfest celebration with polka and lager, and they're sitting there drunkenly celebrating Oktoberfest. And then the Jewish detainees of the of Dachau break out, and they get into combat with the Nazis. And the Nazis hide inside the music festival, and then the Nazis shell the tents down, the Oktoberfest celebrations down, and they roll tanks over it, and they burn everything there, and then they hide the evidence by burying everything. Would you say that the Jews were fucking responsible? I mean, it's just like, come on, man. Like, I don't think that the deaths of civilians at the music festival were good. I condemn the deaths of civilians, but I also understand you can't have a fucking concentration camp under siege and then when the prisoners break out, be surprised that they commit violence against the country and the citizens of the country that put them there. I just ask Americans to imagine if Mexico reoccupied Texas, since it was originally a part of Mexico, and slaughtered Texans for forming militias and fighting back. And they always say that's different. Israel is a part of a biblical prophecy. If anybody says that to you, they're either insane, religious fundamentalist, and they should be discarded and they shouldn't be listened to. Like, what? They're like, what are you fucking talking about? Like, who are you talking to? That's the most extreme far right thing I've ever heard.
What has happened in Gaza over the past 10 months is devastating. So many innocent lives lost. Desperate, hungry people fleeing for safety over and over.
What happened to your peer?
Again, the scale of suffering is heartbreaking. President Biden and I are working to end this war such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination.
Look how people cheer for the Palestinian people, even in the DNC. Now, it's all lies, what she said there, and she doesn't believe a word of what she just said, but even the DNC cheers it. That's how pathetically out of step these genocidal maniacs are. The biggest applause line is self-determination for Palestinians and freedom for Palestinians. Fucking pathetic.
Take whatever action is necessary to defend our forces and our interests against Iran and Iran-backed terrorists. I will not cozy up to tyrants and dictators like Kim Jong-un who are rooting for Trump. Because, you know, they know he is easy to manipulate with flattery and favors. They know Trump won't hold autocrats accountable because he wants to be an autocrat himself. And as president, I will never waver in defense of America's security and ideals, because in the enduring struggle between democracy and tyranny, I know where I stand and I know where the United States belongs. So fellow Americans, I love our country with all my heart. Everywhere I go, in everyone I meet, I see a nation that is ready to move forward, ready for the next step in the incredible journey that is America. I see an America where we hold fast to the fearless belief that built our nation and inspired the world, that here in this country, anything is possible, that nothing is out of reach. An America where we care for one another, look out for one another, and recognize that we have so much more in common than what separates us. That none of us has to fail for all of us to succeed. And that in unity there is strength. You know, our opponents in this race are out there every day denigrating America, talking about how terrible everything is. Well, my mother had another lesson she used to teach. Never let anyone tell you who you are. You showed them.
What's the thing that Kamala Harris could do to regain your critical support? End the war in Gaza immediately, with no further delays. That's it. As I've said from the beginning, I will not support Kamala Harris unless the war in Gaza ends and the genocide ends, and the Palestinian people are protected and given help and assistance to rebuild. That's it. They're not going to. I'm not going to support her while the war on the Palestinians is still going on. It's just not happening. So that's that.
Who you are. America, let us show each other and the world who we are and what we stand for. Freedom, opportunity, compassion, dignity, fairness, and endless possibilities. We are the heirs to the greatest democracy in the history of the world. And on behalf of our children and our grandchildren and all those who sacrificed so dearly for our freedom and liberty, we must be worthy of this moment. It is now our turn to do what generations before us have done, guided by optimism and faith, to fight for this country we love, to fight for the ideals we cherish, and to uphold
Genocide.
The awesome responsibility that comes with the greatest privilege on earth, the privilege and pride of being an American.
Ew.
So let's get out there, let's fight the next great chapter.
Bibi was the biggest winner from the DNC. No speaker mentioned him at all. Yeah, because the conservative think tank AIPAC supports Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli maximalism. So like the Israeli debate is to the left of the American debate on Israel at this point. And the Israeli debate is extreme fascist. That's the reality.
In the most extraordinary story ever told. Thank you. God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America. Thank you all.
I don't think there was one part of that speech that I thought was good. Like I don't think there was one part of that speech that was good. I don't remember Hillary's speech being this bad. And by the way, people going, oh, they're being yimbies are the dumbest dolts in the fucking planet. The idea that you just deregulate all land use policy and that's going to result in some sort of like amazing boom. Dumber than fucking dirt. It's just the Gaza part, but aside from us, most people simply don't care much. That's the reality. Yeah, I think the reason why humanity is stuck in the rut that it is stuck in is because of a selfishness, a narcissism, and a laziness that is inculcated in people. And it is shameful. I want to contrast these. This was the end of Tim Walz's speech.
And the government, state, and housing are where workers come. Keep moving forward. That's how we'll turn the page on Donald Trump. That's how we'll build a country where workers come first. Healthcare and housing are human rights. And the government stays the hell out of your bedroom. That's how we make America a place where no child is left hungry, where no community is left behind, where nobody gets told they don't belong. That's how we're gonna fight. And as the next president of the United States always says, when we fight, when we fight, when we fight, thank you. God bless.
So, like, legitimately, was anybody mad about the Wall speech? It seemed to me that everybody was quite happy with the Wall speech. Everybody was vibing. It was so. What was the calculation here? That there was a bunch of people mad about this? It's not evident anywhere I could see. What's going on here? Listen to the rhetoric there. This is very clearly the Wall's campaign strategy, and we all find it to be incredibly effective. What we don't find to be effective is the Kamala Harris speech.
She has no idea who Mike is.
Mike. I don't know who you are. I don't know where you are. But you may want to start changing your ways. Change new ways. We're changing your